discussing domestic Gothic. This presentation will identify what domestic Gothic is and why it's important to investigate in the Gothic text or novel. I will compare it to the domestic scene found in Victorian literature and the Victorian period, which demonstrates domestic Gothic's value. The class text that I will analyse to convey a type of domestic Gothic is Shirley Jackson's We Have Always Lived in the Castle. By looking at this text, I will demonstrate the capabilities that Gothic texts have to challenge traditional domestic life. Two understandings of domestic space in Gothic texts that I found useful in understanding the capabilities of domestic Gothic were by Catherine Spooner and Emma Liggins. Spooner states, the term female Gothic has become predominantly associated with the narrative of the imperiled heroine fleeing a male persecutor through an imprisoning space that takes place in more or less symbolic fashion of the domestic environment. Typically, we see the female character in Gothic texts who is trapped by the domestic space. The space they inhabit often causes their downfall and entrapment. Liggins understands the importance of the domestic space when she states, an examination of the spatialities of women, of the ways in which they inhabit and navigate space in the Gothic mode opens up new understandings of gender and modernity. Because females in the Gothic genre are so connected to the spaces they inhabit, it is extremely valuable to investigate domestic spaces. This allows for the position of the female character to be understood further and for their gendered experience to be understood. A prominent period that utilised domestic spaces was the Victorian period. This period directly affected how women were situated in domestic life. An example of this domestic experience is Angel in the House. The prevailing ideology regarded the house as a heaven, a private domain opposed to the public sphere of commerce. Whereas husbands earned the money, wives had the important tasks of administering the funds to acquire and maintain social or political status. Women operated domestic life. They cared for this space in order to aid their husband and aid their social status. The spaces they created were safe, comfortable environments. The female domestic angel had autonomy of this space. However, Gothic texts challenge this presentation of domestic life by changing the autonomy of the female character. The image of purity created in Victorian domestic life is disrupted by the Gothic as domestic spaces have multiple different effects on the female character. Some are trapped by household walls or preyed upon by men who govern the space. Carol Corine conveys this difference between safety and danger when she calls the Gothic home a sanctuary and a prison. Quirine is discussing 19th century Gothic texts, but this domestic disharmony is found throughout the domestic Gothic scene. This disharmony is shown by Stephen Brum, who understands that our domestic lives are supposed to be governed by a logic of chronology. Older and wiser parents care for and instruct their innocent, vulnerable offspring, but not in the Gothic psychological subject. Positions shift and float, rearranging and destabilising the roles assumed to belong to each person in the domestic arrangement. Domestic Gothic life is not structured by order. It's a kind of chaos that is often not predictable. Not only is domestic life altered, but the gendered roles of society change. Spaces are jumbled and are not a safe haven which has been orchestrated by an angel. This chaos can be seen as causing the violence and supernatural occurrences and the drama in the domestic space. We Have Always Lived in the Castle is a text that performs the ways that Stephen Brum has identified. The role of parents in the novel has been adopted by two sisters, Medica and Constance, as Medica murdered their parents. Automatically, the domestic situation is different, as it starts violently with a bloody murder. They have already gained full autonomy of their home, and the novel details how it is their desire to keep it safe and separate, and keep themselves separate from society. The sisters' domestic tasks maintain the house and themselves, but this is because they desire to do so, not because of the control of a parent or other person. This quote perfectly represents this, as Merricat desires to block off all entrances to the house which are vulnerable to other people breaking in. This desire for safety in domestic life is set off in the novel when we learn of the no trespassing sign. This maintains their separation, and their mother is quoted to have said, "My front door is private," which conveys their private domestic life. The danger that the sisters experience come from outside of their home. This is unlike other Gothic texts where domestic spaces are deliberately created to threaten the female character. They hide from the gaze of others while they continuously gaze out into what they believe is dangerous. They are rarely watched but are always watching. The desire for a safe domestic space and for invisibility leads to their awful reputation. The damage in reputation characterises them as supernatural beings. They are given mythic personas with otherworldly powers. A villager is quoted to say, "Don't, the ladies might be watching. You think they can see in the dark? I heard they see everything that goes on." The sisters are feared by children and other villagers. However, there is fear from inside and outside the domestic space, as the sisters fear the disruption of their life. Dada Downey clearly analyses Jackson's use of the domestic. As a narrative tool, then the supernatural allowed Jackson to create vivid images of what domestic life is like for women and the dangers and terrors inherent in such a life, rendering explicit and lurking horror that suburban life both created and denied. We Have Always Lived in the Castle directly shows a different type of domestic life for the women. This unique use of domestic space is understood to show that, from the outside, it appears to be very much a place of danger and dread. It is now, in Jackson's terms, a place of safety, precisely because its Gothic sneer is turned towards the intruders rather than, as in the case of Hill House, towards anyone foolish enough to try to live there. Jackson's novel has little danger to its female characters from their domestic space. The majority of danger comes from outside the home to scare others away. This creates a domestic space where women have full autonomy in the home, but the danger comes from the society who is outside. Therefore, the domestic Gothic is valuable for investigation as it displays the position of women in society. Domestic Gothic challenges the harmony of Victorian domestic life and instead shows domestic Gothic spaces to be dangerous and unique. Jackson's novel shows this danger, but she demonstrates that the domestic space is threatened by those on the outside. Victorian domestic spaces aid the social life of its inhabitants, but the domestic space in Jackson's story is shown to deliberately isolate the sisters, so it does not aid their social life as they do not desire a social life. Domestic Gothic spaces are interesting to investigate because of their ability to challenge the norm and present a different idea of what life should be.